Open the bag. Grant Mercer's voice carried across the marble floor of Bellamy and Rowe, past the diamond cases and champagne service, until almost every customer in the flagship boutique was looking at the same person. Evelyn Brooks stood between two uniformed security officers, one hand still resting on her plain brown handbag. A $14,000 bracelet is missing. You were at the case. We're searching you. Evelyn's fingers tightened. She was the only black customer surrounded by people dressed for private appointments and five-figure purchases. 20 feet away, junior sales associate Maya Reed went pale. Did you check the cameras? People with nothing to hide cooperate. Grant pulled the handbag toward him. A worn leather coin purse fell out, struck the marble, and spilled 3/4 at his shoes. A customer lifted her phone. Maya looked toward the jewelry counter, because she had seen where the bracelet went. So had Grant. And neither of them yet understood why the quiet woman bending to pick up those coins could end his career with a signature. What would you do if the person accusing you already knew there was another explanation, but decided you looked more believable as the thief? Evelyn did not raise her voice. That was not weakness. It was the reason Grant's next decisions would be impossible to explain away. Evelyn Brooks owned Bellamy and Rowe. Not the building, not a few shares, the luxury retail chain itself. 23 boutiques carried the name she had built over 30 years, but Evelyn kept herself largely out of advertising. Customers knew the brand, not the woman behind it. That anonymity was why she had entered the flagship store without warning. Corporate had received 3 complaints about Grant Mercer in 6 weeks. Different customers, similar language, selective surveillance, unnecessary bag checks, security summoned before facts were verified, employees discouraged from challenging management. None of it was enough, by itself, to decide Grant's future. And Grant had a great deal riding on that future. He was the leading candidate for district director. Evelyn had come to observe him before approving the promotion process. Grant did not know that. He also did not know that the final authority over his employment sat above store management, regional operations, and the ordinary hour process. Evelyn had deliberately left that part invisible. She wanted to see how Grant behaved towards someone he believed could do nothing for him. Now he was showing her. 3 hours earlier, Evelyn had sat in a car across from the Halston Arcade, watching customers disappear through the brass doors of her flagship store. Before getting out, she removed the diamond brooch she normally wore to board meetings. Then she opened her handbag and touched the old leather coin purse inside. It had belonged to her mother, Lorraine. Lorraine Brooks had spent 31 years working alterations in a department store, taking buses before sunrise and packing lunch in wax paper because buying food downtown cost too much. The purse still contained 3/4 and a faded photograph of Lorraine in her work uniform. Evelyn carried it on days when business decisions affected hourly workers. Lorraine used to tell her that courtesy meant very little when it was reserved for important people. Evelyn crossed the street in a simple navy coat. No assistant, no security detail, no appointment. Within 2 minutes of entering Bellamy and Rowe, she noticed a security officer reposition himself. She walked toward handbags. He followed. She moved to jewelry. He followed again. A white customer lifted a designer tote from a display and carried it toward a mirror. Nobody reacted. When Evelyn touched a smaller bag, Maya Reed approached immediately. "Good afternoon. Let me know if you need anything from the case." "Thank you. I'm only looking." Maya stepped away, but Grant appeared behind her. His silver tie was perfectly centered. His lapel carried the small gold insignia reserved for flagship management. "Stay close to this section," she said. "She's browsing." I heard her. Evelyn heard him too. She could have ended the visit there. Instead, she continued toward the jewelry cases. Her restraint had a purpose. If she identified herself, Grant would change. Employees would change. Security would change. She would no longer be observing the store. She would be watching a performance for the owner. And if she disciplined Grant based only on her own experience, the anonymous employees who had complained could become targets. So Evelyn accepted the discomfort of being underestimated in order to see what happened next. She asked Maya to show her a Marceau bracelet. Maya unlocked the case. The bracelet rested on black velvet beneath concentrated white light. Evelyn turned it gently in her fingers. Beautiful clasp. It's handmade. We only received 2. Grant approached. "Are you planning to purchase today?" "I haven't decided." "Do you have a client account?" "No." "Purchase history?" "Not under my name." Grant looked at Maya. Put it back. She's still examining it. Put it back. Maya obeyed. Evelyn watched Grant walk away. Her throat tightened. She had written Bellamy and Rowe's first dignity policy herself after seeing her mother followed through a department store when Evelyn was 19. Now, a manager wearing Evelyn's company insignia was recreating the same humiliation inside her own business. She wanted to stop him. Instead, she remembered why she had come. The truth had to survive beyond her anger. The store grew busier after lunch. A hotel concierge arrived with 3 guests. Champagne appeared near the private shopping area. A security officer opened a velvet rope for a returning client. The contrast was impossible to miss. Some customers were treated like guests before spending $1. Evelyn was being treated like a risk before doing anything wrong. At the jewelry case, a teenage girl accompanying her mother picked up the Marceau bracelet while Maya reached for a sizing tray. The girl walked 3 steps toward a mirror. Her mother called her. She set the bracelet on a side counter instead of returning it to the display. Maya saw it. Evelyn saw it. Grant saw it too. He picked up the bracelet while answering a complaint from another customer. For nearly a minute, it remained in his hand. Then Grant placed it behind the register beneath several gift boxes and turned away. 20 minutes later, Maya opened the case. "Mr. Mercer? What? The Marceau bracelet isn't here." She checked twice. Grant came over. "You moved it when Mrs. Langley stopped you. I think you put it—" "I didn't move anything. I saw you holding it." Maya. Her name became a warning. She fell silent. Grant scanned the department. His eyes found Evelyn. "Call security. We should check the counter first." "Call security." 2 officers approached. Several customers moved closer rather than farther away. Phones appeared. Grant stopped directly in front of Evelyn. "We have merchandise missing." "Then locate it." "You were the last person handling it. Your employee returned it to the case." "She did." Grant turned sharply. "I'll handle this." Then he faced Evelyn again. "Open your bag." The accusation had now become public. Evelyn felt heat rise through her face. Her hand shook once against the handbag strap. She looked at the camera above the register. "Please preserve the recording from this department." Grant laughed quietly. "You don't dictate our procedures." Grant reached for her handbag. Evelyn released it rather than create a physical confrontation. The purse fell. The coins scattered. One rolled beneath a glass display. A customer nearby whispered something to her husband. Evelyn knelt. Nobody helped her. Then Maya looked toward the gift boxes behind the register. A thin line of gold reflected beneath them. "Mr. Mercer, wait." Grant followed her gaze. His face changed, only for a second. But Evelyn saw it. Maya saw it. And Grant still did not stop. "Continue the search." One security officer hesitated. Grant pointed toward the bag. "That's a management instruction." The officer removed Evelyn's wallet, reading glasses, keys, phone, and the photograph from Lorraine's coin purse, one item at a time, onto the velvet counter. Customers watched. A woman filmed openly now. Maya stared at Grant. "The bracelet may be under those boxes." "We are following loss prevention procedure." "Is your procedure to ignore merchandise you can see?" Grant looked at the boxes. He knew exactly what Maya meant. Instead of checking them, he ordered the second officer to block the side counter from customers. Then he asked Evelyn for identification. She handed over her driver's license. Grant read the name. Nothing registered. Evelyn Brooks meant nothing to him. He returned the card with 2 fingers. "Your address doesn't match any client profile. Being in your database is not a condition for entering a store. People come in here every day pretending they can afford merchandise." That sentence changed the room. A few customers looked away. One security officer shifted uncomfortably. Maya's expression hardened. Evelyn picked up her mother's photograph. She had tolerated being followed. She had tolerated the accusation. But hearing Grant turn wealth into a test of who deserved basic respect struck somewhere older. For one moment, she nearly told him. Her name, her position, everything. Then she saw the camera. She saw Maya. And she realized Grant was no longer making one bad assumption. He was using the system beneath him to make the assumption official. "Have you found anything in my bag?" "Not yet." "Then check the place your employee told you to check." "We're not finished." Grant ordered security to escort Evelyn to a small client consultation room. She refused. "If you are accusing me publicly, resolve it publicly." "You don't decide that." One officer moved toward her arm. Evelyn stepped back. Several phones lifted higher. Maya finally crossed the floor and reached for the gift boxes. Grant caught her wrist before she touched them. Go to the staff room. The bracelet is right there. Staff room. Now, Maya did not move. Grant released her wrist. Then he lowered his voice. You are still inside your probationary period. That did it. Maya's face drained. Her mother depended on her health insurance. Grant knew that because Maya had requested scheduling flexibility for her mother's chemotherapy appointments. She stepped backward. Grant turned to security. Take Miss Brooks to the office. Evelyn's stomach tightened. The investigation had just become something else. Grant was willing to use an employee's vulnerability to keep a simple fact from being checked. And now Maya had to decide whether keeping her job required becoming part of his lie. Evelyn left the store 90 minutes later without being charged. Grant claimed the inventory discrepancy remained under internal review. He banned her from returning until the review was complete. That evening, Evelyn sat alone in her kitchen. No board members, no attorneys, no employees watching her. The strength she had held all afternoon finally gave way. She emptied her handbag onto the table. Her mother's coin purse had a new scrape where it had struck the marble. Evelyn rubbed her thumb across it. Then she cried. Not because Grant had failed to recognize her. She had wanted anonymity. She cried because she remembered Lorraine returning home from stores where clerks had followed her between aisles and pretending it did not hurt. Evelyn had spent decades believing she had built something different. Now she had seen how easily a policy could become meaningless when the wrong manager controlled the room. Her phone displayed 6 unanswered calls from corporate counsel. She almost returned one and ordered Grant removed immediately. Instead, she called only one person, Regional Director Thomas Hale. Do not tell the store who I am. Evelyn, after what happened... Not yet, her voice cracked. I need to know what happens to Maya tomorrow. She ended the call and closed the coin purse. If Grant retaliated against Maya, this was no longer about Evelyn's dignity. It was about whether an employee could tell the truth and survive inside Evelyn's company. The next morning, Grant answered that question. He suspended Maya before the store opened. Grant called Maya into his office at 8:12 a.m. He accused her of violating procedure, undermining management in front of customers, and mishandling high-value merchandise. Maya asked whether they had reviewed the cameras. Grant said the footage was being evaluated. Then he gave her a written suspension pending investigation. What Grant did not know was that Maya had noticed something before leaving the night before. The flagship security system stored video in 2 places. The local interface allowed managers to bookmark or export clips. The central system retained the original footage automatically. Maya knew because part of her probationary training involved documenting disputed transactions. Before Grant ordered her from the floor, she had used the register terminal to flag the exact time of the bracelet incident. Not copy it, not alter it, simply mark the timestamp. At 8:26, she called Evelyn. She had copied Evelyn's number from the incident form before Grant removed it from the desk. Miss Brooks? Yes, I'm sorry for calling. You don't need to apologize. He suspended me. Evelyn closed her eyes. There it was, the thing she had feared. He says I mishandled the bracelet. Did you? No. Then don't sign anything saying you did. Maya became quiet. There's video. I know. No. I flagged the exact timestamp before I left. The Central Archive should still have it. Evelyn sat forward. That mattered. Grant could dispute memories. He could characterize witness statements as confusion. A time-stamped central recording was different. Did you tell him? Yesterday? Evelyn remembered Maya pointing toward the counter. Grant had seen the gold reflection. He had continued anyway. There's something else. Maya explained that Grant had asked security that morning to rewrite the incident narrative. The original entry said missing merchandise. The revised version described Evelyn as a suspicious subject refusing private screening. Evelyn had never refused screening. She had refused to be hidden from witnesses. Grant was no longer protecting himself from embarrassment. He was constructing a record. Evelyn looked at her mother's coin purse on the table. Then she called Regional Director Thomas Hale again. Preserve the central video before anyone touches another file. I'm contacting it now. For the first time, Evelyn believed the evidence might end the matter cleanly. But at the flagship store, Grant was already trying to make sure there would be nothing clean left to find. By noon, Grant had learned someone requested preservation of the footage. He did not know the request came from Evelyn. He assumed Maya had complained to regional management. Grant entered the security office and asked for the local export. The officer on duty told him the recording had been flagged. By whom? The officer said Maya's employee login appeared on the marker. Grant demanded the file. Then he called Maya from suspension. "Come in and finish your statement. You suspended me. This is your opportunity to correct the record." Maya arrived because she feared refusing would be called insubordination. Grant placed a one-page statement in front of her. It said she could not confirm where the bracelet had gone. It said Evelyn had behaved aggressively. It said Grant had followed standard procedure. Maya read it twice. "This isn't what happened. It's what can be established. I saw you put the bracelet behind the register. You saw movement in a crowded department. The video shows it." Grant leaned back. "Video without context shows whatever people want it to show." "Then watch it." Grant did not answer. Maya pushed the statement back. "If you refuse to cooperate, your suspension becomes termination. For telling the truth? For failing to follow management direction." The distinction mattered to Grant. It would matter later to investigators, too. At 1:17 p.m., Thomas Hale called the flagship store. He instructed Grant to make no changes to security records and no employment decisions connected to the incident. Grant agreed. 12 minutes later, he terminated Maya's system access. Then he removed the local video bookmark she had created. For several minutes, Maya believed the only obvious evidence was gone. That was Grant's first false victory. He printed a screenshot showing the empty local bookmark list and placed it beside her statement. "There's no flagged recording." Maya stared at the screen. "I flagged it." "Apparently you didn't." Her confidence collapsed. She had risked her job because she believed she had protected the evidence. Now the marker was gone. Grant slid the statement toward her again. "Sign it, and I can recommend that this remain a suspension." Maya's hand hovered above the pen. At corporate headquarters, Evelyn was learning another part of the story. 3 previous customer complaints had all been closed at store level. Each closure used nearly identical language. No policy violation substantiated. No supporting video available. No employee corroboration. Evelyn asked who had closed them. The answer was Grant Mercer. Then Thomas called. The local bookmark was deleted. Evelyn's stomach dropped. "And the archive?" "It is checking. The store's retention configuration changed last month. We don't know yet what's synchronized." For the first time, Evelyn understood the scale of the risk. If the central recording had been overwritten, Grant could turn the entire incident into competing accounts. A wealthy owner saying she had been profiled, a high-performing manager insisting he had followed procedure, a probationary employee already accused of mishandling inventory, and phones from customers might show only fragments. Evelyn could still fire Grant. She owned the company. But ownership was not evidence. If she acted without a verified record, Grant could portray himself as the victim of an impulsive owner protecting her pride. Worse, Maya would carry the stain of his accusation into her next job. At 2:40 p.m., Evelyn returned to the flagship store. Grant did not recognize her ownership, but he recognized the woman he had accused. His expression hardened. "You were told not to return during the investigation. I came for my property." "What property?" "My mother's photograph is missing." When security emptied Evelyn's handbag, the photograph had been separated from the purse. It had never been returned. Grant looked irritated. He opened a drawer behind the service desk. The faded photograph was inside. So was a printed security still. Evelyn saw only a corner before Grant covered it with his hand, but that corner showed the jewelry counter and a timestamp. The footage had existed long enough for someone to print from it. "Where did that image come from?" "Internal records." "You said there was no useful footage." "I said the matter is under review." Grant handed her the photograph. Evelyn looked at Lorraine's face, then at Maya's empty station. "Where is Miss Reed?" "She is no longer your concern." A door opened behind him. Maya walked out, holding a sheet of paper. Her eyes were wet. Grant had just fired her. Evelyn followed Maya outside. Maya stood beneath the awning, clutching the termination notice with both hands. "You didn't sign his statement?" Maya shook her head. "No." Then she looked away. "But I can't do this anymore." Evelyn stopped. Maya explained that Grant had told her future employers might receive a misconduct notation if she continued disputing the report. Her mother's treatment bills were already overdue. She needed another job immediately. "I'm sorry. I saw what happened. I know what happened. but I can't be the witness anymore. That hurt Evelyn more than she expected. Not because Maya owed her testimony. She did not. It hurt because Evelyn had asked the young woman, silently, to carry a risk that Evelyn herself could end with one phone call. Evelyn almost revealed everything, almost told Maya that Grant could not blacklist her because the woman standing beside her owned the company. But Maya's fear was real, even if Evelyn could solve this one problem. Evelyn opened her handbag. The old coin purse rested beside Lorraine's photograph. For the first time since entering the store, Evelyn wondered whether staying silent had become its own kind of cruelty. "Please don't call me again." "I won't." Maya walked away. Evelyn remained under the awning alone. The video might be gone. The witness had withdrawn. Grant had built an official report. All Evelyn had left was the one thing Grant had never bothered to question: her own authority. Then Thomas Hale called. "Evelyn, we found the archive." The central recording had survived, not because of Maya's bookmark, because Bellamy and Rowe's loss prevention system automatically mirrored high-value jewelry feeds to an off-site server for insurance compliance. Grant had administrative access to the store interface. He did not have permission to alter the insurance archive. Thomas reviewed the footage personally. Then he called Maya. He did not pressure her to testify. He told her only that the original video existed and her termination was frozen pending review. 20 minutes later, Maya called back. "If the video exists, I'll tell the truth." Evelyn returned to the store at 5:30. Grant was conducting the evening staff briefing. He stopped when he saw her. "Security." "That won't be necessary." Thomas Hale entered behind Evelyn. Grant recognized him immediately. His posture changed. "Mr. Hale, I didn't know you were visiting." "I'm here about yesterday's incident," Grant began, speaking quickly. "We had a credible loss concern. The customer was uncooperative, and one probationary employee mishandled." "Stop." Thomas placed a tablet on the counter. Maya entered through the staff door. Grant stared at her. The recording played. The teenager moved the bracelet. Grant picked it up. Grant placed it behind the register. Maya pointed toward it. Grant looked directly at the exposed bracelet beneath the boxes, then ordered the search to continue. Nobody spoke. Thomas opened the incident report. "You wrote that Miss Brooks was the last person observed handling the bracelet?" Grant swallowed. "Based on what I understood at the time, the recording shows otherwise." He opened another record. "You were instructed at 1:17 yesterday not to alter files or take employment action. You terminated Miss Reed's access 12 minutes later." Grant looked at Evelyn. Confusion replaced irritation. "There is one more fact you need before this review continues." He turned toward the employees. "Miss Evelyn Brooks is the founder and owner of Bellamy and Rowe." Silence spread across the sales floor. Grant finally understood who he had searched, but he still did not understand what she could do next. Grant's face lost its color. His eyes moved from Thomas to Evelyn, then to the gold Bellamy and Rowe insignia on his own lapel. "Miss Brooks, Evelyn raised one hand. "Please let Mr. Hale finish." She did not announce her power. She did not list everything she owned. Thomas did the verifying. "The archive establishes that Mr. Mercer knew there was an alternative explanation before ordering the search. It also establishes that he saw the bracelet behind the counter before that search continued." Grant shook his head. "I was protecting inventory." "Then why did you refuse to retrieve the inventory?" Grant had no answer. Thomas continued. "The revised incident report described Evelyn as aggressive. Customer video showed her standing still. The report claimed Maya could not account for the bracelet. Maya's original timestamp showed she had identified the relevant moment immediately. The personnel system showed Grant had suspended Maya after she contradicted him. Then came the piece Grant had never known. "Your district director candidacy required final ownership approval." Grant looked at Evelyn. The promotion had been the center of his year. He had spoken about it constantly. He had pressured employees to produce flawless numbers because he believed the district position was already within reach. Evelyn's exact leverage had finally become visible. She had not entered the store intending to fire him. She had entered intending to decide whether he deserved more power. Grant had made that decision for her. "I can explain. You had a customer telling you to check the cameras. You had an employee telling you where the bracelet was. Then you saw it yourself." Her voice remained low. "Which part still needs explaining?" Grant looked toward Maya. She was confused. No, it was the first time Maya had interrupted him without fear. You saw the bracelet. You looked straight at it. Grant's jaw tightened. This is being exaggerated because of who she is. Evelyn's expression changed. No. She picked up her mother's coin purse from the counter. Who I am is the only reason you are frightened now. Yesterday, you thought I was nobody. That was all she said. Thomas removed Grant's management access card. Effective immediately, you are relieved of store authority pending final termination processing. Grant stared at him. Pending? Evelyn finally made the decision the title had promised. The employment decision is mine. She looked directly at Grant. You're fired. The first consequence happened before Grant left the sales floor. Thomas collected his store keys and disabled his management credentials. Grant had to cross the same marble floor where he had ordered Evelyn's bag searched. Employees watched silently. So did several customers who had returned after seeing clips of the incident online. Grant tried to stop beside Evelyn. I made one bad judgment. You made several choices after the facts gave you a way out. Security escorted him to the office to collect personal belongings. For the first time, the officers were not following his instructions. That was Wave 1. Grant tried to save himself before Wave 2 began. He emailed corporate hour that night. He blamed security training. He blamed Maya's unclear communication. He called his wording toward Evelyn regrettable, but argued that his decisions had been motivated by theft prevention, not bias. The attempt failed because the evidence he had ignored showed otherwise. The bracelet was visible. Maya had identified it. The camera captured Grant seeing it. His revised report contradicted the recording. 3 days later, an independent hour review reopened the earlier customer complaints. Employees who had once remained silent were interviewed away from Grant's supervision. Maya gave a full statement. So did both security officers. The company confirmed that Grant had used loss prevention discretion inconsistently and retaliated against an employee who challenged him. His termination became final for misconduct and retaliation. Maya's record was cleared completely. That was Wave 2. Wave 3 reached the thing Grant cared about beyond salary. His identity had been built around status. He had told friends and family that he was about to become district director. He had reserved a private room at a club for what he expected would be his promotion celebration. The reservation was canceled. Not by Bellamy and Rowe, by Grant himself. A former colleague later told investigators that Grant had avoided the club because several members had seen the customer videos circulating locally. The humiliation Evelyn never asked for had become attached to the reputation Grant had spent years polishing. But Evelyn refused to turn that into entertainment. When employees asked whether the company would release Grant's personnel findings publicly, she declined. Accountability doesn't require spectacle. Grant lost his job because of what he did. He did not need to lose his dignity for Evelyn to recover hers. 6 months later, a new reporting system operated in every Bellamy and Rowe store. That was Evelyn's one permanent change. Any employee who believed a manager was overriding evidence, applying security rules inconsistently, or retaliating against staff could send a protected report outside the store's management chain. The report went directly to regional compliance. Store managers could not delete it. They could not see who filed it, and they could not close it themselves. Evelyn resisted adding 10 new rules after one scandal. She wanted one mechanism that gave an honest employee somewhere safe to stand. Maya helped test the system before launch. She had accepted reinstatement, but not as a reward for protecting Evelyn. She returned because the company cleared her record, restored her lost pay, and gave her the choice without pressure. One afternoon, Evelyn visited the flagship again. This time, Maya greeted her near the jewelry cases. "Good afternoon. Looking for anything?" Evelyn smiled. "Just browsing," Maya laughed. Evelyn reached into her handbag. The old leather coin purse was still there. The scrape from the marble floor had never been repaired. She had considered replacing it. Instead, she left the mark exactly where it was. Lorraine's photograph sat inside. 3/4 rested behind it. The purse no longer reminded Evelyn only of what her mother had endured. It reminded her that a company's values were not proven by the words an owner wrote. They were proven by what happened when the owner was nowhere in sight. And now, for the first time since that afternoon, Evelyn believed Bellamy and Rowe had become a little closer to the company she had promised her mother she would build. Grant thought Evelyn's silence meant she had no power. In reality, it gave everyone around him time to see exactly how he used his own. Have you ever watched someone get judged before the facts were even checked? and wish somebody in the room had spoken sooner? Tell us what you would have done. Share this story with someone who believes dignity should never depend on status, and subscribe to Still Waters for more stories about the underestimated, the overlooked, and the quietly unbreakable.